Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas Touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Welcome, everybody, to the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, maimed Mark Tipton.
Maimed Mark Tipton. Oh, well, that is a tremendous name you've given me this week. I'm trying to remember it. It evoked memories of, and I'm trying to remember the exact name that Mick Foley was originally given before he became Mankind. I want to say
Mason the Mutilator.
Thank you, the Mutilator. Yes, I knew there was some tremendous name they had proposed to him that he turned into Mankind, which is a credit to him. This week, on the subject, what we would like to talk about is something that is very significant, very important to people who participate in professional wrestling in the ring, and it is something that harkens back. We early on in this podcast, we talked about the F word and why people have such, and myself included, have strong reactions to the F word. And there are reasons why, and it's because there are realities that come into the ring. Very significant things can happen, and what I'm talking about is injuries. Now, it can affect as something as simple as the booking of a match or a big event you have coming up, or it can be a life, changing, altering situation. And the idea of this subject is to try to give the listeners a perspective from someone who is in the ring, such as yourself, on this. So I'd like to just let you go and talk to the listeners about wrestling injuries.
Yeah, wrestling injuries are they're a lot more prevalent today than they were because obviously we've been up in the ante, for decades. Your body is not meant to do the things that we do. Tracy Smothers told me for years that every bump you take is the equivalent of being in a 35 mile per hour car wreck. He said that was a legitimate thing, that they did some kind of study or something like that. And he quoted that actually quite a bit to me. And that seems very logical. So, think about that. Every bump is like a car wreck, technically. Now, see, I'm considered one of the safest guys around as far as, I don't do anything nuts. I don't do anything crazy. I do what, I tell great stories and do that kind of thing, but I don't do anything that would be considered dangerous. And even me, at 21 years in the business, I have been injured quite a bit because it's, like I said, your body is not meant to do the things that you do. Wrestling hurts no matter what you do, but it hurts a lot less when you do it correctly, right? So I try to do it correctly, and I've not had as major injuries as some guys, but I've had some injuries. One, I guess we can talk about is, I've broken ribs. I've broken my ribs several times over the years, apparently. Sometimes I didn't even know. Like we found out later when we did x-rays and stuff like that I, in fact, did have broken ribs. Most recently, my broken ribs, I was wrestling a guy out of Texas, and, like big kid, I liked him, so, I kind of wanted to do more in the match for him than I normally would, and he really wanted to do The Rock's tilt-a-whirl power slam. I don't know if you remember The Rock doing that in the late 90s, but it was basically just like almost like a tilt-a-whirl into a power slam. And I was like, okay, I don't normally take stuff like that, but, I'll take it from you. So we get to the match. It gets to that part of the match. I hit the ropes, come back to him, deer in headlights. Doesn't remember what's going on. So, like, he kind of half-ass picks me up, and then he picks me up and doesn't know what he's doing, and he just drops me across his knee and breaks my ribs. So then I spent the next month. I spent the next month with broken ribs, and I never missed a match. I didn't bump for a month, and people didn't even realize. Like, everything I took was like a crumble. kind of thing. But everything we still worked. I was still working 30-minute matches. I'm sure you were there during this time, so
Certainly.
I was still working 20, 30-minute main events, and no one was the wiser. You know what I mean? But I had to do that to be able to wrestle.
All right, and I guess you speaking about this is something I wanted to get across, because when we thought about discussing this, as someone from outside the ring, I looked at this and I thought, everyone who steps into the ring, this is a intensely personal subject for them, because they are putting their health at risk, and they're doing it for the entertainment of others. And there are occasions where, as a fan, let me take it out of wrestling. I'm a football fan. I'm a season ticket holder to a professional football team. And there are times I see athletes carted off the field. I see, guys who can run 4 or 5 40s not be able to walk off the field under their own power. And sometimes I think, well, they're doing this for my entertainment. And so, and I suspect, I'm going to, jump in your mind here. There has to be, in your mind, even if you see a fellow wrestler get injured in the ring, where you kind of give a second thought, hey, this is something I'm doing, and I'm doing it for the entertainment of others, but I'm taking a very significant risk here.
Yeah, I mean, we always put ourselves in other people's shoes in that situation. Like, and really it comes down to, was it a fluke thing, or was it something egregious that they did? You understand? The Rock, during his match with John Cena at WrestleMania, he tore his abdomen, right? He tore it from the bone, I think they said. And he continued and finished the match and good stuff like that. But like that's a freak thing. Like I don't think there's any way he could have foreseen that, or he did anything wrong to do that. Now, then there's guys like Marco Stunt, who Marco's from around about this area. Okay, so there was a lot of support for him in this area when he started making a name for himself on the independent level. And, here he is. He's got all this steam. And then all of a sudden he takes a Canadian destroyer off a stage into some chairs at some random event and breaks his leg. You know what I mean? And that cost him bookings. That cost him money. That, in my opinion, halted his momentum. Wrestling is a lot about momentum. Do you have momentum going into this? Are people talking about you? It's a very organic thing sometimes. So when you do something stupid and you get injured, it hurts. It hurts your business. It hurts the business overall. But like I said, and that's what we're saying. Like, wrestling hurts no matter what, but when you do it correctly, it hurts a lot less. When I'm saying that is hey, take care of yourself and take care of your opponents. So we're not, we're not shortening our careers too much.
All right. You just came into something that came to mind that I wanted to discuss, and let's just bring it up right here. What you're getting at, and you alluded to this, into the types of things that are being done in the ring now that didn't used to be. Now, if you want to go back to, say, the 50s, where it was a more mat-based presentation of professional wrestling as opposed to what we see today. The example I'd like to cite, so everyone listening understands where I'm coming from, we're talking about someone being, the word I'll use is dangerous in the ring. The person who has who has often made me cringe as I watch his matches is, I'm going to point to Jeff Hardy. Now, Jeff Hardy is someone I'm sure everyone is, listening to this is familiar with. We know him well. But I have routinely seen him do things in situations where I think this is a bad thing to do, period. But certainly in the situation in which he chooses to do it, although I guess in his credit, and I'm rambling here a little bit, I would almost say to his credit, the danger he imposes seems to be more to himself than to his opponent most of the time. I'd like to let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's just one of those things where, how did he make his money? How did he get over? It was because of that. You know what I mean? And that's, unfortunately, when that happens, that's kind of the course of action for your career, right? He basically became the Evel Knievel of professional wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, as much as people like to see Evil Knievel hit the jump, I think they'll all tell you too that they kind of wanted to see a wreck too. Him be okay, not him die or anything like that, but something disastrous sometimes will happen. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is with some wrestling fans too. It's like, I at some point I was thinking there's no way Jeff Hardy is going to be able to do the Swanton past 35 years old, and obviously I was wrong. He's still doing it and still doing it at a high level. I always wanted him to more transition away from that kind of stuff though, and kind of scale it back, and he has not. So that's kind of up to him. But like, what do you tell a guy that's made millions of dollars in professional wrestling by doing it this way? Like what does our opinion matter to him? It doesn't matter anything to him. So I wish he would transition more, because obviously Jeff Hardy's a big name, and I want him to be around for as long as possible. But that's the way it goes.
All right. Well, I appreciate you indulging me on this a little bit, because for those watching home or listening at home, I want to explain where I'm coming from. I saw, and I kind of want to bring it back to Marco Stunt if I can, but I saw on a regular weekly episode of TNA, Jeff Hardy was there. I believe he turned the steel stairs over sideways, placed his opponent on it, went for the swanton. The opponent moved. Then he landed flat on his back on those steel stairs, which did not give at all. Right. And I was watching this, and as silly as it is, I did find myself thinking, A, it was crazy to do, but B, this was a regular weekly episode of Impact Wrestling. If you do this, if you go out of your way and do something crazy, it's WrestleMania. I'm going to jump off the top of a ladder at WrestleMania. Well, as strange as it seems, I can almost rationalize it to myself.
Well, it's the same thing like we've talked about before, and this is a callback to another episode. Timing is everything.
Yes.
Big bumps are always been a part of wrestling in some form or fashion, but like you said, it's got to be at the right time in the right place with the right guys. You know what I mean? Like we can talk about how Kenny Omega, who we do not like, obviously for many reasons, but so one of the matches with him and Okada in Japan.
Yes.
Kenny Omega takes a backdrop from in the ring, clears the top rope, and lands on a table and demolishes the table. It was beautiful. I'm going to be completely honest. It was a beautiful, beautiful spot. Like, it looked devastating, right? And then eventually they cleared him from the wreckage, and he wrestled another 20 minutes.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, that should have been
the end.
That should have been the end. That should have been an injury angle, if anything.
Right.
But like, they think, oh, we can do this. I disagree. Because like I said, this stuff actually hurts, and the more stuff we make people believe in, hey, this stuff actually hurts, and this actually hurt me. You know what I mean? The better off we are. But when they do stuff like that, it desensitizes everybody to injuries, to this, to that, and then someone has to. Becky Lynch. The only reason Becky Lynch is over is because Nia Jax punched her in the face. And how sad is wrestling today when we're so enthralled with the fact that someone actually got punched in the face. Someone got punched in the face and they bleed, and we're like, holy shit, do you see that? She got punched in the face. You know what I mean? And that's the only reason that Becky Lynch is over, because she sat there with that blood on her face and she took it like a man, quote unquote, and like that's what got it over.
Ooh, goodness. I want to come back to that someday later. We'll set that aside. What got me going on this is you mentioned Marco Stunt, and why I was drawing the analogy to Jeff Hardy. I questioned Jeff Hardy's decision on when to take that dangerous bump that he took. And you mentioned Marco Stunt took a Canadian destroyer at a, nondescript show somewhere and kind of cost himself in his career. And that's one of the other things. Even when you set aside the personal cost to the person involved in the injury, these injuries can impact the business. And that's ultimately what this podcast is largely about, is the business of professional wrestling. An example I'd like to cite and let you give your opinion on was there was a time we have often talked about the Memphis wrestling promotion. There was a time where Jerry Lawler, obviously the biggest draw and biggest name in the Memphis territory for many years, injured himself and broke his leg, is my understanding. The way I heard it was in some kind of touch football game or softball game or something he was doing in his off time, broke his leg, and then the Memphis promotion had to radically change because your top babyface, just a top babyface there, is now out of action for an extended time period.
Yeah, exactly. It was a football game, and for some reason Lawler, he considered himself an athlete, so he played softball and he played football and stuff like that, played football with his buddies and things like that. And sure enough, he breaks his leg playing football. So Jerry Jarrett, is obviously pissed because, Lawler was the guy. Lawler was the main guy, and that's when Jimmy Hart had to come on television and talk about how Lawler broke his leg and that, he's like a thoroughbred horse. And when a thoroughbred horse breaks his leg, what do? You take him out back and you shoot him in the head. You know what I mean? So that kind of did that. But they never, as good as they did in that era of trying to move forward and trying to do the best with a bad situation, all the houses, from what I understand, were down. You know what I mean? Because Lawler wasn't a part of it. And it wasn't until he came back that it boomed back again. And so, when it has major repercussions like that, it makes a big difference. Same thing, Triple H, was supposed to go main event against John Cena at WrestleMania 23. And then he blows his quad out again. And then Shawn Michaels gets plugged into the spot. So these injuries, change wrestling history, for better or for worse.
Quick note for those listening. You mentioned Shawn Michaels and Cena at WrestleMania 23. Although that match was good, approximately 3 to 4 weeks later, they had a match in London during the second hour of Raw. And I would encourage everyone to seek that match out and watch it. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a 45-minute marathon. It was amazing. It's a masterpiece. It really is. And I always point to that when people say John Cena can't work. Fuck you. Like, you cannot go out there and have that match with Shawn Michaels if you're not carrying your own weight. You understand? Shawn Michaels can carry anybody to a good match, like a 10, 15-minute, whatever. But if you're going to go out there for 45 minutes and tear the house down like they did, there's no way you can do that with somebody that can't carry their load. You understand? So John Cena, to me, that's the one match that I always point to. Like, you don't think he can work? Go watch that one, and then tell me he can't work.
Yes, there are a few matches that stand out in my mind, and that was one of my favorites. And I would say in the top 3 John Cena matches I ever watched. And because Cena is someone who's fascinated me. I was never a huge Cena fan, but I was never a John Cena sucks guy either. Just watching everyone else's reaction fascinated me more. But I guess one of the things, a subject I want to bring up to let you talk about and see how you react to. One of the aspects of being injured, and you mentioned this you related the story about the guy wanting to do the tilt-a-whirl body slam. One of the things that is about professional wrestling is you can be injured through no fault of your own. What you do when you get into the ring is there are points in a match where you are putting your well-being in someone else's hands, and you have to trust them. And I believe you said, hey, I trust the guy I was working with. I don't normally do this sort of thing, but there's what it is. And so if you could, I'd like to hear you expand upon the idea of putting trust in someone else, to take your well-being into their hands.
Yeah, that's what we talk about. I'm not a big fan of the blind brotherhood that a lot of people talk about in professional wrestling, because it is a cutthroat business. Now there are lots of guys that I like and I'm friends with, but as far as actual like brothers go, Like, I have very few of those in professional wrestling, but I have a lot of acquaintances and a lot of friends that I like, and things like that. So yeah, the level of trust that you have with somebody is on on that level is, hey, yeah, I'm putting my body in your hands. Don't make me regret it. You know what I mean? And there's been several times where you regret it. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, one of the guys I started with, I love him to death, but he could not pull his kick for anything, and like he kicked me dead in my head, and basically concussed me. Like it was pretty bad too. It was so bad that I was, on the way home, I asked my wife, "Hey, whose number is this?" And I said the number, and she's like, "That's your home number." You know what I mean? Because like I was completely out of it, and I've probably had, if I was gonna guess, I've probably had close to a dozen concussions in 21 years, and obviously, my career is running right next to this whole CTE, thing that's been going on in sports and wrestling and football and things like that. So it's a big issue now. Like when I started, you took chair shots to your head. You know what I mean? You didn't put a hand up. You took a chair shot. You know what I mean? Now we're a little more lax on that because we understand, the things that are happening. So, anytime you're putting yourself in someone's hands, it's a big responsibility, and that's why we all try to take care of each other, because at the end of the day, you're trying to make a living, I'm trying to make a living, and we can't do that if we're injured.
All right. And in fairness on that, one thing that I do remind myself of is, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is that sometimes it's not even necessarily somebody's fault. There could be a miscommunication. Yeah. I recently watched a match where I saw someone, I believe, take a potential injury in which there was it looked to me like one guy was expecting a spine buster and the other guy delivered an inverted atomic drop.
Yeah, that happened. I don't know if I told you about that. Or
Oh, okay.
I think I told you about that because that happened to me.
Oh, okay.
Because the guy shot me off, and I swear to everything holy, he said spine buster.
Yes.
And then when he picked me up, he atomic dropped me.
Yes.
Directly on my taint.
Yes. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, and it was one of the most painful things I had endured at that point. Another one is like, I was on the top rope, and someone hit the top rope, and I go to do the crotch yourself on the top rope, and I missed the buckle and ended up, on the metal, right? And I did not have a hand to catch myself, and I ate that on my taint as well. And that's the last time I did that one, like that. So, yeah, these things have a way of changing your mindset sometimes and changing how you do things. Like, I remember I took a belly-to-belly off the top from Christian Jacobs, years ago, and for some unknown reason, I did not put my foot on the top rope. I was standing on the second buckle on the outside of the buckle, and he had hooked me for a belly-to-belly, and I couldn't jump from that position, so he goes to belly-to-belly me, and I was heading straight for my head, and he gave me a shove at the last second and got me over. And I still landed kind of high on my shoulders, but nowhere near as disastrous what it could have been. And I watched that match back now. This has been 10, 15 years ago. I watch that back. Every time I just cringe and go, that could have been it. You know what I mean? That could have been the one right there.
All right. And very quickly, I want to slide in when you mentioned about kicks and things of that nature. A real aspect that has happened that everyone might be familiar with is Bret Hart essentially had his career ended when Goldberg attempted to do a super kick, which I do not recall him ever doing prior to that moment. He did it at Starrcade. I believe it was 99, but I could be wrong on that. And so that can be very serious and, really end careers. But you brought up one other thing that I did definitely want to bring about, and you used the word injury angle. Now, one of the things, this is where I'm going to talk as a fan again. I do this from time to time. There are times when I'm watching professional wrestling and I see a wrestler down, and sometimes I suspect the injury may be legitimate. It may be very real and very painful. This guy may have been hurt, and I hear the fans at ringside saying, kind of reacting, "Oh no, that's not no big deal. He's not really." And I think one of the things that plays, and I think it aggravates me, but I don't want to say anything and make the situation worse, because I say no, there was something significant there. And one of the reasons I believe that is because of the injury angle. The thing I will cite is, and I first saw this, I guess it was on WWE television, I suppose. It became known that if there was an injury, the referee would hold up his hands in a cross above his head. A legitimate injury, that the referee would do that. Then, as that kind of became common knowledge, I saw instances where I saw injuries that I did not believe were legitimate injuries, and I saw the referee do that. That kind of aggravated me, because this is where the kayfabe aspect comes into play. Because then, does the audience not react appropriately?
Yeah, that's one of the things. That thing changed the business. You understand? Like, there's certain things that happen that change the business. So, obviously, someone gets injured, we're going to throw up an X. Well, people start noticing that. So when they start noticing that, well, we can use that to our advantage.
Use it in an angle.
And we use it in an angle. And then they start using it, and like you said, it kind of loses its luster a little bit. But it's just one of those things that kind of evolved and changed with the business. Now, if they stopped doing that for years, and then all of a sudden someone did it, it would work again, right? Same thing with, let's talk about this, tapping out. Tapping out was not a thing in professional wrestling. If you were in the figure four, you gave up. If you were in the sharpshooter, you just gave up. You didn't tap on the mat. Tapping didn't come out till the UFC started.
Right.
And that was UFC's influence on professional wrestling. Completely fine with that, because it's a good visual.
Yes.
You understand? So it works both ways. But yeah, like you're saying, a lot of those things change the business, like I said, for the better or for the worse. But it's one of those things you're using the elements around you to try to garner the most reaction. So that's what they were trying to do.
All right, wrestling fan moment once again here. For those of you who predate the tap out, many of us do remember things like the great Gordon Soley, 5 letters, 2 words, I quit. Yeah. Thank you for letting me slip that in there. I suppose one of the things we should talk about, and you can talk about this better than I is, an injury that happened not in wrestling or in the ring was Hulk Hogan had his leg broken while training, traditionally. I believe it was with Hiro Matsuda, and I hope I got that name correct. To become a professional wrestler, he had his leg broken, and he pretty strongly indicated it was intentional.
Yeah, I mean that's the way. In the heyday, that's what they used to do. Like, if you went to train, they wanted to make sure that you were legit, and they wanted to scare you off, because if they hurt you, if they injured you, and then you eventually came back, that means you really wanted it, and that's kind of what they wanted. That was their way of protecting the business. We're not going to let every Joe Schmo come into the business. So here's Hulk Hogan, who let's face it, Hulk Hogan is a very braggadocious guy anyway, right? I can only imagine what he was like when he was 22 years old and, 6'8" and, tan in Florida, and all the women are falling all over him and stuff like that. And he plays bass in a band, you know what I mean? So he's half rock star too,
Almost a cliche.
Almost a cliche, yeah, very much so. So I can only imagine the kind of attitude he had. So I imagine, that was one of those situations. Well, we're going to break this motherfucker's leg, and we'll see. And he did. He got out of the business. He quit, and someone had to talk him into coming back, because they saw the potential in him. And who would have known the impact that had on professional wrestling? But yeah, it's things like that are. And let me be completely honest. As a wrestling trainer, there are times that I would like to break someone's leg just to prove a point. Can't do that nowadays, because you'll get sued, immensely, and we won't have a business to work out of. So, but I wish that certain things were still allowed.
Well, certainly, and I appreciate you using the key phrase I'd always heard was "protect the business," and that was really what I believe was being done there. And obviously, the business has changed greatly. Now, as we draw towards the end, really, I think one of the big questions we have to ask and let you speak to personally is, what was your worst injury that you suffered as a result of professional wrestling?
Oh, good question, Mark Tipton. Well, I have a multitude of injuries, right? So, like, they actually told me I needed double knee surgery when I was like 22 years old, and they want to do double scopes, which isn't major, but it's still knee surgery. Since then, my knees have, obviously they're pretty shot, you know what I mean? But I do the best I can with them, and I think I've done all right. One time, Chris O'Neill went to give me a tornado DDT, and my head went this way, and my shoulder went that way. And I completely stretched out the entire neck muscle, shoulder muscle right there, and that was painful for several days, like excruciating pain for several days. Probably the worst injury I've ever had, though, is by our buddy Derek King. Derek King goes to grab me in a match, and he pokes me directly in my right eye.
Oh, no.
Right? And people think, I get poked in the eye. So no. He poked me in the eye, right? So, like, that hurt a lot when it happened, right? And then, like, my vision was kind of blurry. I was like, it'll clear up, that kind of thing. Well, a couple days go by, and from what they tell me, basically he put a scar in the center of my eye, right? And then as I blinked, it kept opening that scar up even more. Oh. Right, so a couple days later, I'm actually at the fair in Dyer County, and I'm at the fair, and like I almost collapse with, like, I can't open my eye, right? So it ended up being a huge ordeal for me for several weeks, and I eventually had to. They actually say that I still have the scar and it's healed over now, but if it gets too dry, and I rub it and do too much to it, that scar will still open back up, and I could still have an issue. What they call an eye episode.
Oh.
Right? So that was my worst injury, because even now, like, as we talk about it, I can still feel it in my eye a little bit.
Wow. Okay. And ultimately, that's what we want listeners to keep in mind when they hear people in or even, in my case, outside the ring, react strongly to the use of the word fake, because sometimes that does not apply at all.
No, I don't think there's any other business that, if your passion is music, are you going to bleed for music? Are you going to have broken bones for a song? You see what I'm saying? Like, we're constantly giving up our bodies for professional wrestling because we love professional wrestling. We want to, have the best match. We want to do all that kind of stuff. So, it's addictive, and that may be some kind of character flaw to some people, but for us, that's the world we live in. So, for me, it's unfortunately, it's part of the business. It's never going to change. There's always going to be injuries unless we get to the cinematic portion like we're talking about, where it's cut, take two, do this, do that, and then they just find the most absurd way to make it as phony and movie-like as possible. Let's hope it never goes that route, but that could be the possibility.
Although, in fairness, I believe it was Edge that was injured doing a reshoot for a cinematic match.
Yep, and I've talked about that before. That'd be enough right there for me to cut cinematic matches out right there, because if we're having these guys, and we talked about that before, if you cool down and you go to do something else, shit happens.
Right.
So anyway, once again, we are never going to be directly on 30 minutes. We will always be probably a little bit over. But for myself, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and my co-host, maimed Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.